Hi there, this is just a little video about 16-mark questions. I've titled it How to Maximise Your Marks in 16-mark Questions. So just a little overview of what I'm going to cover. I'm going to talk about focusing on the question. I'm going to take a little look at mark allocation. I'm going to talk about how many evaluation paragraphs you need, the big question. And I'm going to talk about effective evaluation, and then I'm going to finish with looking specifically at the application questions for 16 marks. So just remember, this is for the A-level psychology AQA. All right, so number one, we're going to talk about just focusing on the question. One of the key things or problem areas that students have shown over the past couple of years in terms of the examination is they're trying to memorize essays. That's really problematic because you couldn't actually sit and memorize every possible variation of question AQA can introduce. So I've just put 3 different examples here of essays around the same area, but the content of them is very different. Now, the one in the middle there is your probably standard one that you're going to memorize for your 16 marker, which is discuss research into conformity. And then I put 2 variations of that question on there. So you've got discuss what research into conformity has told us and discuss how conformity research has been conducted. So as well as your kind of standard 16 marker, your standard discuss or kind of describe and evaluate, you do also have these variations, questions that just focus on the findings of research and questions that just focus on the methodology of the research. So it's very, very important that you understand these areas in detail and not just memorize a 16-mark question. The second thing I'm just going to clarify is the mark application for 16-mark questions. Now, these are marked holistically, and what these means is that the examiner will look at the essay as a whole, but there is a mark allocation for the different assessment objectives. If it's a standard 16 marker without a STEM, there are 6 marks for your AO1 knowledge and 10 marks for your AO3. So your AO1 is your descriptive knowledge, and your AO3 is your evaluation. When there's a STEM introduced into the question, your AO1 marks remain exactly the same. There's 4 marks for the application part, that's your engagement with the STEM, and then there's 6 marks for your evaluation. So the AO3 is reduced and the marks from the AO3 go into the AO2, and that's going to impact how many evaluations you're going to need if it's a STEM type question. I'll talk about how to structure STEM type questions at the end. So in terms of how many evaluations, this is the big question that students ask a lot, but AQA doesn't actually specify the number of evaluation paragraphs that you need in a 16-mark question. All they're concerned with is that you're able to demonstrate the breadth and depth of knowledge in the sense of you can actually have a discussion. Now, in order to do that, you're probably going to need somewhere in the region of 3 or 4 evaluation paragraphs. That's in a standard 16 marker, so 6 marks AO1, 10 marks AO3. If there is an application in that question, remember that AO3 marks are reduced, so you're probably going to want to bump off one of your evaluations in the application question. Otherwise, you're going to run out of time if you still try and write those 4 evaluations in an application question. Okay, 4. Now this is going to be the bulk really of what I'm going to talk about because it's the most important thing in terms of 16 markers. What lets students down isn't the knowledge, because the knowledge is pretty easy to learn. You can learn the knowledge. What they struggle with is developing their evaluation points. And when I say points, I mean the paragraph in a whole, not just the beginning of it. Now there's essentially 4 different reasons that students struggle on their evaluation. Number 1 is the generic use of methodological evaluation. Number 2, and this is a big one, is the generic use of issues and debates evaluation. 3 is a lack of research evidence in evaluation. 4 is no line of argument. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run through each of these and give you some examples in terms of what they mean, and hopefully you can pick up some pointers here in terms of how to improve your evaluation in your 16-mark questions and indeed improve your evaluation overall. Okay, so we'll start with the first one, which is generic use of methodological criticisms. Now this is a big one, and it's been flagged up in the examiner's reports for the last 2 years that when evaluating pieces of research, students are just throwing in these generic evaluations. And what I mean when I say generic is I could literally almost we're changing a few words, pick up your evaluation and put it into another essay, and it would almost read like it was okay. So if we just take a look at the one I've put on the slide here, and this is, let's say the question was discuss research into the effects of leading questions on the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. So we've got one of the main criticisms of the Loftus's research is that it lacks ecological validity. Loftus used a laboratory experiment to investigate leading questions in eyewitness testimony, so the research is likely to lack validity. It doesn't mean anything. That evaluation is entirely generic. What I often ask or say students should do is try and hook their evaluation into the piece of research. So if I'm going to say Loftus's research lacks ecological validity, I need to know why it lacks ecological validity and also why that's an issue. So I'm going to show you a version of this paragraph which has those hooks in and isn't therefore a generic paragraph. Here we go. Obviously it's bigger. So one of the main criticisms of Loftus research is it lacks ecological validity. This is because Loftus asked participants to view a car crash on a video, and this is not the way that individuals would witness a car crash, and as such the research is unlikely to reflect what would happen in a real life setting. As such, we might question how useful Loftus's findings are in informing us about the effect of leading questions on eyewitness testimony. So you see what I've done there? I've demonstrated what the ecological validity issue is by discussing the fact that she used a video, and then I've discussed what the implications of that are. That's to say, why does it matter that she only used a video? So please bear this in mind when you're going to go down the route, which is, the valid route to go down when addressing or evaluating research studies. When you're using this methodological criticism, you've got to hook it. If it's a generic paragraph that could literally apply to anything, you're not going to get any credit for it. Okay, so the next issue is the generic use of issues and debates evaluation. And again, this has been flagged up in examiners' reports 2 years running. AQA don't like it. Students seem to be obsessed with throwing in issues and debates evaluation. There is nothing in the mark schemes for 16 mark questions saying that you have to refer to issues and debates, unless of course it's paper 3 and it is actually the issues and debates section. So you don't have to do it, but if you're going to do it, it's very, very important that you do it right, knowing that this is a bit of a red flag area in terms of evaluation. So let's take a look at an evaluation paragraph here. So this would be from a 16 mark question on discuss the biological explanation of OCD. And we've got one issue with the biological explanation of OCD is that it is deterministic. This is because individuals are not likely to have any free will over whether or not they develop OCD. This means that the explanation doesn't consider other factors. But there's nothing in that in terms of what the student has said. So again, what I'm going to do is apply the same formula that I use with the methodological criticism. I have to explain why it's deterministic and why it is a problem. So here we go. So you're going to see this is a lot bigger than this paragraph. Okay, so we've got one issue with the biological explanation of OCD is that it's deterministic because it assumes that candidate genes for OCD are likely to determine whether individuals have OCD. Even assuming that there may be some environmental interaction with genes, e.g. a diathesis stress model, this is still deterministic as we have little control over our environment. This is problematic as individuals may have the candidate genes for OCD and environmental triggers, yet not go on to develop this disorder. In this respect, we could argue that the causal explanation is somewhat flawed, as there may be other mediating factors that determine the onset of OCD. So you see what I've done there, which I didn't do in that first paragraph. I've explained why it's deterministic. And I've done that in the context of candidate genes, but I've even drawn in the diathesis stress model and said, you know what, even if we bring in the diathesis stress model, it's still a deterministic explanation. And then I've said why this matters in terms of what the problem with this is. And the problem is people could have the genes, they could have the stresses in terms of the environment and not go on to develop OCD. So what that tells us is there must be some flaw here in terms of this explanation because it doesn't explain everybody. Okay, next issue then with your evaluation. And again, this is from the examiner's reports. You can get the examiner's reports online, read them, they're really informative, is lack of research evidence in evaluation. So here's an example of what I mean by this. So here we've got a statement of one of the strengths of the use of drug therapy to treat OCD is that it's been shown to be an effective method of treating the disorder. The fact that there is evidence showing it works suggests that the disorder itself has a biological basis. That is a classic Classic example of a student's talking about all this wonderful evidence. Well, show me the evidence. I want to see the evidence. So let's take a look at what this paragraph should look like if the student had done what AQA asked and actually used research evidence in their evaluation. One strength of the use of drug therapy for OCD is the research evidence showing its effectiveness. Zamaro 2008 demonstrated that when compared to a placebo, SSRIs were more effective at treating the symptoms of OCD across 17 different drug trials. Such results indicate that the use of drug therapy for OCD is justified on the basis that it is an effective method of reducing the symptoms of OCD and increasing the quality of life for patients. Okay, that's what AQA want to see. They don't want to see you referring to, there is evidence to show this. Tell me what the evidence is. I want to know what that piece of research is. And it's really important to introduce the piece of research because in a moment when we go on to looking at line of argument, I've actually got some kind of line of argument to make. Okay. Like I said, line of argument. So you might have heard this term before. You might be thinking, what the hell am I going on about? What line of argument basically means in a 16-mark question, and it's referring mainly to the evaluation part of it, is whether or not you are able to tell a story in your evaluation. And all the story part of it means is there is some flow between the different evaluations that you're making. That's to say, you're not just picking up 4 different peels, peaks or burgers or whatever you call them and just throwing into your essay haphazardly. You've actually thought about how you're going to introduce your evaluation, how your evaluation is going to flow from one to another. Okay, so let's go back to the evaluation that we just looked at when I talked about introducing evidence into your evaluation. So we've got that paragraph here, so I've talked about, oh, they're effective, here's some evidence to say they're effective. Now I want to demonstrate to you how to introduce a line of argument into that paragraph, which would look something like this. So you see here, the green is where the line of argument starts. So I'm going to carry on and I'm going to say, that being said, as the drugs only treat the symptoms of the disorder, not the cause, they are arguably not likely to be a long-term solution for the patient. For a long-term solution, the patient may need to access a cognitive therapy. And that line of argument is really nice because then into my next paragraph, I could go in to discuss why cognitive therapies might be more successful than drug therapy as a treatment for OCD. So you see what I'm saying about line of argument is I'm telling a story. I'm going to introduce some evaluation, I'm going to evaluate it, I'm going to move into my next evaluation. It basically gives your answer to your question a lot better flow. Okay, the final thing that I just want to talk about is the application question as a 16-mark question. So remember, in these questions, the mark allocation is 6 for AO1, 4 for AO2, that's the application bit, and 6 for AO3, which is your evaluation. So what you need here is less AO3 in your answer. Now, nailing these is all about structure because it's really super easy to get your AO1 and your AO2 marks muddled and mixed together, so you lose a lot of the marks. So my advice in terms of structuring these is I would treat the AO2 as a separate paragraph. So I'd introduce my AO1 as normal to make sure I'd covered all the knowledge-based points that's going to be applicable to that question. I'd do my AO2 paragraph separately and then I go on to do my AO3. I mean, that's a basic structure. You may kind of split the essay and do AO1, AO2, AO3, AO1, AO2, AO3, but I'd certainly try and keep my AO1 and AO2 separate, especially if trying out application questions is new for you. Maybe when you get kind of more adept at these and better at them, you can start to integrate your AO1 and AO2 when you've got a sense of how much you should have. But I think certainly as a starting point, I'd try and keep them separate. What I'd say is a bit of a red flag in terms of your application. Students really struggle. It's more than just a name. So it's more than just if it's a person, say, named in a STEM, picking out their name and throwing it and embedding a little bit of knowledge in it. You've really got to engage within that application in order to get those 4 marks for your AO2. All right, I hope this video has been useful to you. I hope you picked up some tips. If you've got any questions, feel free just to pop them in the comments section of this video. Ta-ta.